What's actually the fastest gaming keyboard out there? Keyboard manufacturers will often try and sell you on the fact that, their keyboards are a million times faster than the competition and they can solve world hunger, but mainly it's just, marketing nonsense. So my goal today is to pick apart exactly what's just marketing and what actually makes a keyboard faster and better for gaming. So let's dive right in. We're going to choose different keyboards based on the price range. So, if you're looking for a budget option or a mid-level option or, more of a high-end option, we'll really pick apart which keyboards are the best in these price ranges for getting the fastest gaming experience that you can get. We'll mainly be looking at what has the fastest response time, not necessarily, what's the most comfortable or what actually feels the best or has the best features. We're looking only at speed here because I think that's really important, because oftentimes for a fast keyboard, you have to sacrifice the other thing. To decide which keyboard is the fastest, you have to look at the whole keyboard as like one big picture, not just the switches, which many people do. There's one big thing that no one talks about when it comes to keyboards. It's the polling rate. The polling rate is how many times the keyboard and the PC talk to each other in 1 second. A really good polling rate is usually around 1,000 or 1,000 hertz, which means that in 1 second, there's 1,000 signals sent between the PC and the keyboard. So basically every millisecond, there's a signal being sent. The GK61 with Gateron optical yellow switches is often considered as one of the fastest keyboards on the market because it has that optical switch with a really short actuation distance. But it has a really, really slow polling rate, only 125 hertz. That means that every 8 milliseconds, the signal is sent. So comparing the GK61 to a 1,000 hertz keyboard, that means that it's 8 times slower if you look just at the polling rate. When you think like 8 milliseconds, 7 milliseconds, 1 millisecond, those are all thousandths of a second, right? Like that can't make that big of a difference. But when it comes down to like who presses a button at the same time, thousandths of a second can actually make a big difference in who comes out ahead. So always keep that in mind. Like we're talking about very small increments of time here, but they really add up over time. One of the fastest keyboards out there currently is the K100. It has a polling rate of 4,000 hertz. That means that every 0.25 milliseconds, that signal is being sent from your computer to your PC. So that means that it's 16 times faster than the GK61 and 4 times faster than, a 1,000 hertz keyboard. A higher polling rate is also a lot more data for your computer to sort through, and that can have a higher stress on your CPU. For example, when I use the K100 and I cranked the polling rate up to 4,000, I actually saw a much larger CPU draw. It was about 3 to 4%. And I have like a decent, mid-range CPU. So like for me, that wasn't a huge impact. But if you have like a much slower computer, using this keyboard might be like more like 10%. And that could really slow down and impact your PC usage. So polling rate is a big deal when it comes to speed, but it can also impact how slow your PC is. So always keep that in mind when picking out a keyboard. If you have a slow PC, you don't want a polling rate that's super fast, because it's more data for your computer to sort through. I would say at least look for a keyboard with a polling rate of 1,000 hertz if you're serious about gaming, and 4,000, that's just like really fast, and most people that won't be worth it for you. Only for super hardcore gamers. Now that we've talked about how much polling rate really impacts the speed of your keyboard, let's talk about the switches now, and let's dispel some myths here. When looking at switches, the biggest thing that you should look at is the actuation type. So I'm talking about tactile, clicky, and linear. So if you're not familiar with what those mean, a clicky switch is kind of what you imagine when you think of a mechanical keyboard. It's loud and clicky on each click, sort of like the Cherry MX. Another option is tactile, which has like a small bump, but no click. So it's just like a relatively quiet, bumpy, like the Cherry MX Brown. But when you're gaming, linear is the option that you want to go for. It's quiet, it's smooth and consistent. There's no tactile bump or no clicking noises. And it really lets you press a button really fast and not get distracted by that bump, and it's always going to be really consistent. So if you're looking for a switch, the first thing you should look for is getting a linear option, not tactile or clicky. So stay away from the blues and the browns. You mainly want reds or, speed switches. Plus, the sound is relatively quiet, so if you're talking with friends, they won't be distracted by like the loud clicking noises on your keyboard. So in that respect, linear is also a great option for gamers, especially if you talk to people. If you're gaming, go linear. All right, second biggest factor. It comes down to whether you have a mechanical or optical keyboard. And no, it's not because optical switches operate at the speed of light or whatever marketing gurus say. The reason for this is something called debounce delay. To let me explain what debounce delay means, I need to walk you through how a mechanical switch works really quickly. So when you press down on a mechanical switch, the plates touch, like the electrical plates. The metal plates can be in contact for a few milliseconds at a time. In order to sort through how many signals want to be sent or how many times the key should register, there's a slight debounce delay, and it's usually like 5 to 10 seconds. That way, if you press a key, it only gets registered once. So on some keyboards, you have the issue of key chattering, which basically means that if you press a key, it gets pressed more than once. So this solves key chattering most of the time. And mechanical switches always need to have that slight debounce delay, or else if you press a key, it might press it like 3, 4, 5 times. But there's always going to be that slight delay, that 5 to 10 milliseconds. And that's where optical switches come in, and they really steal the show when it comes to gaming. Because optical switches don't use the metal plates touching to actuate the key. They actually use a beam of light that is blocked by the stem, and once it's pressed down far enough, then you can actually actuate the switch. With the beam of light, there's going to be no debounce delay, which is a big benefit. This means that, an optical switch can probably actuate around 5 milliseconds faster than a mechanical one, because you don't have that debounce delay. There's no delay from when the first signal is sent to the second one. This is what actually makes it faster for gaming. And like I said before, it's not because it's optical and moves at the speed of light. It just means that you're able to really cut out that debounce, which is great for gamers. There are some downsides to optical switches, and that mainly comes down to personal preference. For me personally, I find that they feel almost fake, and they feel not as good as mechanical. Other people might have like different interactions with the optical switches, but from my experience, I'm not personally a big fan of them, although they are slightly better for gaming. For most people, it won't make that big of a difference, but if you're really trying to cut down to the milliseconds, then optical instead of mechanical is a great way to save on reaction time. Another downside is that they don't really have as many good options out there to choose from, and they don't have as much of an enthusiast following as mechanical switches, so you're going to be dealing with less options to choose from. The third thing to look for, and I would say it's the least important, but it's often what most people look for when picking out a switch, and that's the actual actuation distance, or how far the switch needs to be pressed down before it's registered. A typical switch, like Cherry MX Red, it has an actuation distance of 2 millimeters, but a speed switch usually has less than 2 millimeters. So in theory, it should be faster. If you press the switch down, if you have to travel less, then that means that you'll be able to press your key faster than someone else. Any optical switch that has under 2 millimeters is probably your best bet. A shorter actuation distance can result in a faster speed, but it's not very measurable because everyone has different reaction times, and it's really hard to get clean data about how much time you actually save. So in this regard, I would say shoot for anything under 2 millimeters. Usually around 1 is the fastest that I would go. Anything below that, it can really throw off, personally, my timing when I game, and it almost feels too weird to play with. So usually when I'm looking for a gaming switch, I go for around 1 millimeters. Like I said, there's no concrete data to back it up, but from my personal experience, I think it helps slightly. Test it out. I've used these reaction speed testers, and I've tried different actuation distance switches, and I haven't really noticed too much of a difference as far as the actual reaction time. But I do think it helps. It's just too small of an amount to actually get clean data on. If you're looking for recommendations, I really recommend the Gateron Yellow optical switch. It has an actuation distance of 1.1 millimeters, and it's really, really budget friendly. Another option would be the Razer Red optical. It has an actuation distance of 1 millimeter, and it's also optical. And then the Corsair OPX is also a great option, coming in at 1 millimeter actuation distance. And they're all linear too, so that makes it even better. Just keep in mind, with the shorter actuation distance, there are trade-offs. There will be a little bit more difficulty getting used to typing with that, because you'll probably make more mistakes and press keys on accident just from resting them on the key and accidentally registering it. I've ran into this issue before, and for that reason, I don't really like using my gaming keyboard for typing and writing essays and that sort of stuff. I run a few websites I'm always writing, so using something with a short actuation distance can be kind of a pain to do. For general usage, I wouldn't really recommend getting a short actuation switch, only for gaming purposes. Not to mention, they also tend to be a little more uncomfortable. You tend to bottom out easier, and that can sort of hurt your fingers if you press too hard. There's definitely a short adjustment period to using this type of switch. All right, quick recap. When looking for a gaming switch, you should look for these 3 things, all right? 1, the actuation type. Linear is the way to go. I would ignore tactile and clicky unless you really, really like those. 2, optical or mechanical? Optical is the way to go almost all the time. Zero debounce delay makes it a great choice. Number 3 is the actuation distance. Shorter is usually better. 1 millimeter is about what I shoot for. So there you go. Those are my recommendations for picking out your Switch. So circling back a bit, let's talk about what the actual fastest gaming keyboards are now that we've discussed what actually makes a keyboard fast and responsive for gaming. For the absolute fastest on the market, the K100, the Corsair K100 is your best bet. With a stupid fast polling rate of 4,000 Hertz, this keyboard has a wicked fast response time. It has a 1mm actuating optical switch with 0 debounce, but coming in at $230, like this price is really ridiculous. So if I told you to go and buy this keyboard because it's the fastest on the market, you'd probably slap me. $230 is really expensive. But if you're a super competitive gamer, like you might be able to make that purchase decision because that's what you do with most of your time and you want the best tools and equipment on hand. So for a high-end option, the Corsair K100 is my recommendation. A more mid-range alternative to the Corsair K100 would be the Razer Huntsman Mini. This comes in at around $130 at the time of making this video. And it has 1mm actuating switches. And the main difference here between this and the K100 is it has a slower polling rate of 1,000 Hertz, which means that it's about 0.75 milliseconds slower, which isn't much. It's very, very fast keyboard, especially for the price. And for nearly half the price of the K100, it's a great option. That 0.75 milliseconds, because of the polling rate, is the main difference. The most budget-friendly option on the list would probably be the GK61 or the SK61. These both come in at around the price of $50, and they have, I would get them with the Gateron optical yellow switches, which have an actuation distance of 1.1 and are very, very budget friendly. What you're sacrificing here is the 1,000 Hertz polling rate in place of 125 Hertz polling rate. So what you're gonna have here is a 7 millisecond slower response time. So when you go down to 50, you're sacrificing a bit more. It's still really, really budget friendly, and I definitely recommend it. So if you only have $50 to spend, I would go with the GK61 or the SK61. If you're interested in checking out any of the keyboards I mentioned, you can check them out in the description box below. There you go, 3 solid gaming keyboards, all in different price ranges. That will all be pretty fast, especially at that price. Let me know what you think is the best in the comments down below. Now that we've talked about the fastest keyboards on the market, I guess a good question would be, does having a fast keyboard even matter? Is it worth it? Can I just use, my $10 Dell keyboard instead that came with my PC? Do I really have to spend, $230 on a K100? And the answer is no. You can use a Dell keyboard and have just as much fun as someone using a really expensive keyboard. Gaming is just a fun hobby for most people, and a few milliseconds here and there, it won't make a difference to 90% of people out there. But if you're a really competitive gamer or you're trying to grind the competitive ladder, we all know a few milliseconds can make all the difference in game. And if you really take that stuff seriously, then I could definitely see someone like that person spending more on a keyboard. When it comes to anything competitive, you want to have the best equipment and be in the best position to win. Anyways, it's ultimately up to you what you want to do. My main goal here was to dispel any marketing myths that are out there. I know it can get a little bit difficult to sort through at times, so I really wanted to make this video and really pick apart what makes a good gaming keyboard. Anyways, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something here, and if you have any questions, feel free to comment down below. All right, thanks guys.